Hey guys, welcome back to our Chai with Coaches live stream. My name is Dhru Bee. I'm here with my good friend Naheed Oberfeld. Naheed, want to say hi?
Hello, it's nice to see everybody, sort of, kind of, virtually.
More like let's have everyone to see us, right? Because we can't see them. It's a little creepy in that way. But
Nice to be seen, but that sounds kind of rude, obnoxious.
yeah, it does sound a little obnoxious. Yeah, no, but welcome back, guys. Today we're talking about imposter syndrome. And first, I think I've talked to a couple folks who don't know what it is. So maybe
Mhm.
we can take a little bit of time to define it, talk about what it actually is, and then we talk about how it manifests, right? How it actually shows up, and what some things people can tend to look at and see about themselves that might be holding them back that may not even know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some very controversial advice on this as well.
I'm sure you do. All right, so imposter syndrome typically is it's at its core it's about confidence, right? It's about your identity and how you identify with what your role is, what your perceived role is, right? So for example, someone who's new to a role or a new manager, a new leader of some sort, they might not feel aligned with that role yet. And even if they've been in that role for a long time, they might be like, "Oh, I'm just it's a matter of time before people figure out that I don't know what I'm doing, right? Or that I'm a fraud, or that I'm just not as good. I don't want people to find out, so I got to do extra work to do that to make sure that I'm not looked upon as being what I am, which is a fraud." In reality situation, most times that's not true, right? Most times some of the highest achievers feel like they're frauds, feel like they're not that great at what they do, and they're worried about how people perceive them. And that can hold people back. It does hold people back in a lot of ways.
So I have a question. I'm a woman. I think about it from a woman's perspective. The people that you were talking to, I'm just kind of curious, were they a mix of men and women? Because the people who come to me with imposter syndrome, or who at least admit it to me, let's put it that way, overwhelmingly are women. And so I was just wondering, were these people both men and women?
Yeah, both men and women, and that I'm glad you brought that up because that is a really big perception that it's mostly dealt with by women, and that's not true at all. Actually, women talk about it more,
Mhm.
men internalize it more. So it's actually pretty equal in terms of people folks I've talked to who have it and who deal with it and who suffer through it and struggle with it. But the fact of the matter, there's more. I don't know if I don't want to say if it's more prevalent, but it's more talked about in the female community, right? Like women are able to talk about it with one another a lot more. Guys
We
don't
can
sit
be
together like young men and feel
vulnerable
like,
about it.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay for women to be more vulnerable about it than men, right? Men, I mean, there's this
Absolutely.
perception that men can't share their emotions or they're not supposed to share their emotions. And so as a result, you have a lot of guys who are dealing with this and just not able to talk about it with anyone and not able to confide in anyone about it. So yeah, to your point, it's both men and women.
Yeah, really what you said is something that is so important that people overlook. At the core, it's about confidence. And you mentioned something related to a profession, but it really doesn't matter. Think about new parents and what stress, anxiety, frustration. I mean, the number one thing you always hear is that why doesn't parenthood come with a manual, right? And so this really is about any role we step into where we feel like we've not fully felt comfortable with that role. And that's going to be true for everything, right? Every time we step up into something new, we need to grow into it. But sometimes we never seem to get beyond it. It may be right in the beginning, as you said, with the new manager, but oftentimes the people that I'm talking to, they've been feeling this way for years, especially senior level managers are the people that I hear this from. Like I said, a lot of them from women. And what they think, because I was in that place as well, what they think is if I get the next training, the next certification, the next
Mhm.
degree, somehow or the other, magically, I'm going to start getting confidence in myself. And that is not the key, right? I mean, it does the opposite because now on paper, you're even more qualified, right?
Yep.
And you feel even worse about yourself. So that's one thing I always tell women. I'm like, before you jump into that next certification, if you're doing it for confidence reasons, it's the wrong way to go.
Yeah, because so two things about that. One is exactly what you said, like people seek out that additional training or that additional certification or whatever they want to seek out to get something external. That's external validation. imposter syndrome is not about external validation at all, because ultimately you get the external validation. People are coming to you. They're looking at you as that professional, as that expert in your field or whatever. They're already looking at you that way. But that doesn't matter to you. It's not something that registers to you. So you're already getting the external validation, but you need it universally. Uh, and that's just not reality. Ultimately, you need your own validation, the internal validation that you're not giving yourself. And you have to realign your identities in that way so that you're actually looking at yourself that way first before anyone else does. The second thing I want to say is like this happened back to the male versus female thing. I was talking to a group of law students a couple of years ago. I did a coaching experience for them, all like a full day kind of program, and one of the guys mentioned that he was dealing with this, and three of the girls in the room were like, "Whoa, but you're a guy. What do you mean you're dealing with this? That's really a normally female thing." And then another guy in the room was like, "Actually, I deal with it too." And the girls were shocked because they were like, we thought that this is something that only girls deal with. We didn't think the guys dealt with it because you're a guy. Guys automatically have things easier than we do. And it's like, not so much. That's an assumption. We all have different challenges, right? It's not about someone has it easier automatically. It's different. It's different, right? And to that point, it's about the external validation that you keep seeking additional external validation to fill a gap inside you that you can't fill from external stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're kind of speaking my language here because everything that I deal with, people come to me and say it's an external situation. And I say you start by changing the internal environment, and then the external environment will reflect it. It's just the way it is. Externally, you are seeing how you think about yourself on the inside. And, one of the things that you also mentioned is that we then subconsciously begin to sabotage ourselves. And we don't fully recognize why we do it. We don't recognize necessarily when we do it, but we definitely feel the effects of it. Again, when you're going back from a professional standpoint and you have to come across as being confident in various situations. For me, it was client relationships, right? You got to be able to walk the walk, talk the talk, so to speak. But if you don't feel it inside of you, then how do you get there? And then what do you start doing for your coping mechanisms to kind of pull back a little bit?
Yeah. So you mentioned this controversial opinion you have about this. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
That was it, actually. I couched it a little bit. So there was a lady that I met many years ago. She was one of the most um, degreed person. She was actually a PhD, and she had multiple degrees. And her point, and many women think that all I need is the next degree. And I have told, now I don't know how many people have listened to me, but I've told a lot of young women, don't rush out and do your master's or whatever that next certification or degree is until you get really comfortable and work on the internal stuff. Because what's going to happen is you're going to come out of there with high expectations, but you're going to still have that same old mindset. And if that's going to be the case, you're going to be very disappointed and then feel stuck because now, like I said, you're even more qualified. So you should be feeling even better about yourself. But instead, we end up feeling worse about ourselves.
Yeah, no, and that's 100% true. I mean, it's ultimately you're putting more pressure on yourself, and
Mhm.
you're furthering that external opinion of everybody could have of you, and you're putting more pressure on yourself to be like, oh, well, I have to live up to this extra stuff,
Yes.
and it's just not the way it goes. Like you have to, like you said, you have to fill that gap inside of yourself first before anyone else can fill it for you. The one of the problems is people tend to, I mean, in general, we try to find validation externally, whether you're in a relationship,
Mhm.
whether you're at a job, whether you have a business, whether you're just existing with your friends. You want to be accepted, you want to be validated, you want to get other stuff from the external people, and then you blame them for not giving it to you, right? And ultimately, you have to do it for yourself first. And if you don't do it for yourself, no one's going to believe you when you say that you're a thing. And that's I think that's the thing that people don't necessarily get. And I don't think it's controversial, by the way. Maybe I just we just live in the same circles in some ways, but I don't think that's controversial at all. I think the ultimate thing is really that working on yourself to build up that confidence, build up that level of alignment with your identities, because you also control how the world sees you, right, and how it relates to you. And if you operate at a certain frequency, and that frequency is being held back by whatever your beliefs about yourself are, your limiting beliefs, then you're only going to go so far. You're only going to go as far as you let yourself go. And you mentioned something about self-sabotage, which I want to address. And this is where I have a controversial opinion. It's actually controversial. I don't think there's such thing as self-sabotage. And I think you would actually agree with the way I explain this, because self-sabotage at its core is really your immature version of yourself trying to take care of you the best it knows how. And it doesn't actually know how to do that. So it tells you or holds you back from doing something that it could perceive as scary, dangerous, or risky, right? So it's like, oh, don't do that because you might get in trouble. You might get, you might fail at that. It makes it not okay to fail or not okay to do something that you probably know how to do or could do if you've never done it before, right? But it's trying to take care of you the best it knows how. And how does it know how to do that? It knows how to do that based on its own experience, which is very, very limited, right? It's that base version of you that's like from like 5 or 10 years old or whatever period of time, whatever immature version of yourself is trying to give you advice as a 35, 45, 55, 65 years old person. Now, yes, there is some wisdom in children. I learned this firsthand from my nephew because he's very insightful for his age, actually smarter than most people I know in my current circle. But at the same time, it's like you can't rely on advice from people from yourself at that age because you haven't had the experiences that you have right now, right? You know more about yourself now than you did when you were 10. So
Yeah,
why would you listen to
I
that
agree.
advice?
I agree completely. I think what you're talking about is self-protection.
Yes.
You've got this little piece of you who's stuck in a particular trauma. That's all he or she understands and knows, and its role is to make sure that you do not go back into that trauma place.
Mm-hmm.
So I do agree. So what would you call it if not self-sabotage?
Self-protection, but in I'd say ineffective self-protection, right? Self-protection
Counterproductive, right?
from a certain lens. Because yes, at the end of the day, it is protecting you. It's also
Mhm.
protecting you from growth as much as it is protecting you from success or failure.
So you said something that at first, it reminded me of something, a conversation I had with my husband just this week, actually. And at first blush, I'm going to share the story. It may not seem like it has anything to do with what you just said, but just kind of bear with me. So, as I've said, I'm from India. I've lived in India for about 11 years. I go back now every 2 years, before every year. But my family doesn't speak Hindi. We didn't speak Hindi when we were living in India, as in amongst ourselves. We always spoke in English. And we certainly don't speak in Hindi here. English has always been my dominant language. My Hindi has gone from bad to extremely, extremely rusty. Okay. But here's the funny thing. Occasionally, every now and then, I have a dream in Hindi. And I remember my dreams very well. I'm actually a very vivid dreamer. And I never have a problem in my dreams speaking in Hindi. I remember the dreams, I remember speaking in Hindi, and I never had a problem with it. And the reason this came up when you were talking was because I thought, you know what? I do know how to speak Hindi, but I have convinced myself I've forgotten it all, right? That's that
Yep.
long-term, short-term memory, but kind of like what you were saying. Our conscious mind doesn't want me to look like an idiot, so I don't speak it. And then I keep repeating that message over and over again. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it, right? When we probably
Yeah,
know how to do a
absolutely.
lot more than what we actually do.
No, there's so much power in our stories. There's more power than we think there is in our stories. I mean, and just to reset real quick, for those of you who are just tuning in, please, if you have comments about imposter syndrome, if you've dealt with it, if someone you know has dealt with it, please feel free to post in the comments. Let us know what your experience has been with it. That's what we're talking about today. And but along the same lines of what your story, almost exactly actually, except this was in real life for me. So in 2006, I went to India for the first time. All right, that was my first ever experience in India, and my family's Guyanese, so we're not actually Indian. We're Indian descent. So all the Hindi I know are from Hindi movies and playing cricket with my friends who are FOBs. So it's pretty good actually, but it's like it wasn't a whole lot. I didn't have a lot of confidence speaking Hindi. So if someone spoke Hindi to me, I could understand them, but I would respond in English, right? So I go to India, make some friends there. We're all hanging out, and we there's one night we all go out, we get trashed, completely drunk, right? And we go to one of the dhabas, like one of the little restaurants late night,
Mhm.
and we're hanging out there. And those places are very small. They're very kind of hole in the wall. No one speaks English. So I remember being there. I remember eating food. Food was phenomenal. Next morning, I wake up and my friend's telling me, "Dude, you spoke Hindi really well last night." And I was like, "Thanks, asshole. That's great. Yeah, you're such you're making fun of me. That's great, hilarious." He's like, "No, I'm actually being serious, dude. Like, you actually spoke Hindi really well. You said you don't speak Hindi, but you were talking to the guy for like 45 minutes last night in Hindi." And I was like, "You're full of shit. Of course. How would I do that?" He's like, "I don't know, but you were doing it." And I was like, "I don't remember that at all. I remember having a conversation with him, with the guy, and I remember some of the content, not all of it. I was drunk, but I was speaking Hindi. I didn't realize I was speaking it because consciously I wouldn't do that because I'm like, I can't speak Hindi. I hold myself back consciously, right? But when I'm just free and just flowing, then suddenly I can speak Hindi, and it's like, okay, well, that's really interesting, I've never really explored that in the Hindi realm of things, right? But in terms of subconscious, your subconscious knows a lot more than you let it give it credit for. And we don't do that. We don't tap into that as much. We tend to hold ourselves back actively because we're trying to protect ourselves, when in reality, we're just holding ourselves back.
So I have to say one thing. I'm shocked that you haven't broken out with some sort of Hindi movie reference. I didn't know you were such a big Hindi movie buff.
I'm not
And
anymore. I
if you
used to
think
be.
you
Okay.
used to be, right? If you think I'm bad with English movies, you have no idea how bad I am with Hindi movies.
I've given up with you in all movies. Honestly, I'm not gonna. I don't do enough references with you anymore unless I can actually explain them for like 30 minutes. So I've given up with you in movie references, but I will still go them for everyone else.
Got it. Understood. So um, I think one of the things, and maybe we're deviating a little bit over here, but I like to study psychology. And people who study psychology, especially people who deal with forensics kind of stuff, they will tell you something that eyewitnesses are so unreliable. But when
Yep.
you talk to an eyewitness, they are certain that's what they saw,
Yep.
right?
100%. 100%.
Isn't that
It's
kind of
hilarious.
interesting?
It's funny and scary at the same time because
Yeah.
you have three different eyewitnesses to the same incident, and each one of them will be completely sure of what they saw and give you completely different ideas. It's like, oh yeah, he was wearing a black hoodie. Next person, yeah, he was wearing a red T-shirt. Was it the same guy? Was he wearing a hat? One guy says no, the other girl says no. Says yes. What color was the hat? Red, blue, green, yellow. Like it's just like it's whatever's in your head influences what you see and what you think you see, right? There's a buddy of mine back in college was taking the Capitol Police exam, and so one of the tests, I don't know if they still have that test still exists, but the test back then was like noticing. You look at a picture for like 10 seconds, and then they take it away from you. You gotta recall what you saw in the picture, and it's a retention test, but it's like at its core, it's like seeing the differences in different things and making sure to see how reliable you are as a witness, as like someone who could describe something like that. And it's a really interesting test to do. I'd be curious what the results would be across, like in general, like just as across the population. But to your point, our subconscious is kind of just does whatever it does, right? It does these really interesting things, and it can really influence how we behave without us even realizing it, which is
Yeah, I think
interesting.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No, no, I was
I
done.
think we need to do a whole separate mini conversations on unconscious bias or
Yes.
unconscious behavior, whatever you want to call it. But bias, unconscious bias is a good one to start with. Because we do know, science knows that our brains fill in the gap, right? So, for example, when you're reading, say you're editing something that you've written, people always say give it to someone else because when you miss a word here and there, your brain actually fills in the word. It pretends that it's already there. That's why you don't see it. Your eyes didn't see it, but your brain somehow the other registered it ought to be in there. And so, if we generally take a moment and we're talking here I'm talking about way more than just feeling fear of imposter syndrome, just in everything. If we generally take a moment and stop for a second and ask ourselves, what kind of lens are we viewing this situation with? Because when there's a imposter syndrome, most people think they're afraid to fail.
Hmm.
I think they're afraid to succeed. That this is their way of actually being able to come in and say, what if I do succeed? And what if all these negative ramifications that we think of that, we ourselves place on success? That's one of the things I'm working a lot with my clients who are coming to a place where they're making big strides and they're making big growth uh, strides basically, but then they stop and they're like, "Oh, I'm afraid to fail." But underneath the failures, they're realizing, "Wow, what I'm really scared of is what would life look like if I were to succeed?" And so, if you have people who are going through imposter syndrome, how about just stopping and asking yourself, "Oh, what what would life look like if I really was as good as other people say I am, or I'm really good as what I think I can be?" Instead of allowing the subconscious to just keep throwing up one negative after another, turn that around and see what the positive side of that would be, because that might be a good vision to attain for.
Yeah, no, and that's the other part of it too. Is like what fear of failure is not just fear of failure by itself, right? Failure by itself just doesn't mean anything, and we don't associate. Like, think about a kid before you put any pressure on them about grades, about success, about any of that kind of stuff. Do they care if they fall? Do they care if they trip and if they drop the ball, if something doesn't happen? No, but they care about the impact of that thing. They care about the meaning around that they're making out of that, right? But what are the repercussions if I fail? It's like that means I'm wrong. That means I was wrong. That means I made the wrong choice. That means I got to deal with everyone else around me talking about how much I messed up. That means I'm going to be embarrassed. People will judge me. These are all things that don't actually associate with failure directly. Failure is not a thing by itself, right? It's just something that happens or doesn't happen, right? And so everything is about stories. Imposter syndrome even itself is about a story. Is a story, a collection of stories, and the impact of that is also a story. And so as you're dealing with folks with like that, I mean, I think that's one of the strengths that coaches have. To your point, is we're not no human is purely unbiased. Let's start with that, right? I mean, we all have some biases here and there, whether we want to or not. But coaches are trained in being relatively objective, as objective as we can be, right? Taking that step back and saying, looking at the situation and saying, look, I'm not going to advise you one way or another because it's not about me, it's about you, right? What's the right way to go? You know that for you. I can tell you, hey, here's going to be the impacts, some impacts of this choice, and here's some impacts of this choice, right? And these are the choices you have in front of you. Ultimately, you got to step through that. And I'll do a matrix reference now because
I
I'm an
did
overdue
watch
for a
that
matrix
one.
reference. Wow, well done. All right, cool. There we go. Cool. So there's a scene in there where Morpheus tells Neo, I can only show you the door. You have to open it. That is directly out of a lot of like religious texts. But secondly, it's also a coaching thing, right? We can only show you the different doors you have in front of you and tell you that maybe the benefits and pitfalls of each one of them, some of them, the ones we're aware of, but you ultimately have the mid choice to do that, right? And that's the same thing with imposter syndrome. You have to understand what your options are in front of you, what the real impacts, not just perceived impacts of those things are, because perception is not true reality. True reality is there's another conversation whether that exists or not. But there's a perception that we create about things that makes things worse or better than they actually are. And our job is to try to help you focus on what the not the perceived reactions of things are, perceived impacts, but what the actual impacts could be. And then you make the choice at that point.
Yeah, I find that a lot of what I do is just helping clients to be able to see what's your goal. Sometimes they forget what that goal is, and then help them see that how can you bridge where you are and where you want to be? Because over here is what you tell me are a lot of good feeling thoughts and emotions, right? And you're over here. When you think about getting here, sometimes you bring up all this fear and this doubt and this insecurity. So, what's the real motivation to get from here to here? And I think it's similar with imposter syndrome. What's the real motivation that's making you stop in your tracks or that's making you doubt yourself? Because there's something underneath, as you were saying, fear in itself is not really a thing. It's the stories underneath the fear. So what is that thing that is keeping you stuck in this place? And I always like telling people, asking my favorite question, which is, what's the benefit of staying stuck? When you know that, then you can quickly get over all of this because you can see that it's not reality. It's 100% perception. In fact, I would almost argue that our lives that we live and I'm talking about the physical laws of this universe, it's it's not designed for true reality. We cannot see energy, right? We are not seeing the things that really are. We see hard tables and chairs when those don't really exist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something where it's like, we're sitting there talking about what we want to achieve, right? But like you said, if you weren't getting a benefit out of where you are right now, you wouldn't be doing it, even if it's just a perceived benefit. And it reminds me of the coaching idea of the thinking path. And it's where it's like, so on the one side, you have ultimately you want a result, right? Right now, you have these beliefs or thoughts over here, and then you have underneath that influences your actions, and then the actions get you a certain result, right?
Mhm.
That's over here. That's the current state right here. And then you want to go over here. You want this different result than you get right now. Right now, you're getting this result here. You want to get this result over here. Now, to do that, you got to change your beliefs or your actions. Most people just change the actions and then hope that the beliefs catch up. That happens after a while, maybe. But ultimately, the best way to do that, to really change the result in a more permanent and consistent way, is to change the beliefs and thoughts that influence the actions. Because then there's no prescriptive action you have to take. You'll automatically be taking the right action no matter what happens because you have the beliefs to support that action. And then the results are going to change automatically. Right. And that's where you can take authentic, intentional action as opposed to just saying, tell me what to do. And someone tells you what to do and you do what's authentic for them. Maybe you get the result, maybe you don't.
Um, when you talk about this kind of stuff, it reminds me of Warren Buffett. Everybody wants to understand Warren Buffett's way of investing. They want to understand his thinking, how he does things, why he picks these stocks. And Warren Buffett understands that his line of action will never be the same for anybody else. What got him famous and rich will be completely different for other people. And he keeps trying to share his philosophy, which is something meaningful and useful, which is the beliefs, right? How do you how do you formulate plans? How do you think about these kinds of plans? And the people who really get it can be like him in their own way, not exactly him. But the rest of the people, they just want check the box. Tell me what to do, check the box, and then I'm sure I'll be able to get there. And they don't get there. And they get very frustrated with themselves.
Yeah. There's a difference between telling a man how to fish versus giving him a fish, right? It's the same idea. It's like you give someone a fish, like, and that's something going back to my roots, if you want to call it, in dating coaching, right? That's why I started this whole thing.
We
But
need to have
I'm
another session on that one. This is new to me.
No, that's what it is. Yeah, I started my coaching journey as a dating coach, honestly, and it wasn't. There's a portion of that community which is not coaching. It is training and brainwashing, frankly, but training. It's like, let me basically make clones of myself in terms of how I do things and how I talk to girls or how I talk to women, guys or whatever, right? And either side doesn't matter. But I'll just give you the lines that I use,
Mhm.
and then you use them, and then suddenly you get success. That's BS because it doesn't work. You're like, what works for me is not going to work for you, and vice
Mhm.
versa, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so the authenticity of a situation where you're talking about, this is who I am. I'm going to create my own belief system based on what matters to me and how I see the world, how I want to see the world, right? That's really what authenticity really is, right? It's living into that and being able to say, when I want to relate to someone, I want to relate to a girl in a certain way, right? And I want her to relate to me in a certain way. That's how you find a partner that works with you. Not like, oh, what that guy over there told me to say, I'm going to say that, and then she'll react that way. She's just falling in love with that guy and how he talks, not you. It makes no sense.
Yeah, like I said, we need to have a complete whole discussion just on this one. But let me ask you
Yeah.
this question. So you had a few conversations with people related to fear of feeling like a fraud. So what are some of your suggestions? What could you give some of our listeners as tips for them to kind of consider?
Well, a couple of different things. I mean, I'll start by saying there's not one approach that works for everyone
Hmm.
because, again,
I agree.
authenticity is the ultimate thing, right? But a couple of questions that I would ask them. One is, I think this is probably the most common one is what's on the other side of the fear, right? What's on the other side of that fear for you? And identifying one where the fear is coming from. What are they actually afraid of? Because fear of failure, like I said, is not a thing. It's the impact that they perceive will happen if they fail. That's the one thing. But what's on the other side of failure is the other consideration. And then the other thing is just talking about what's happened in their past, like really delving into their past in terms of what they've experienced in the past that make them feel this way or make them believe this about themselves, right? And allowing them to create some habits for themselves because it's not something you solve in one conversation, right? Um, but allowing them to create habits for themselves to remind themselves of their own qualifications, of their own ability to do what they're doing, of not qualifications in terms of certifications. I don't mean paper. I mean
Hmm.
actual actions and results, right? Who have they been able to work with? What have they been able to do and accomplish in their lives, professionally, personally, otherwise, wherever they're feeling this stuckness or this fear, this imposter syndrome, we delve into that part of their lives and find opportunities, find situations where they've been successful, where they didn't think that they might have been, where they've actually proven the opposite of what they're afraid of, and really remind themselves of that on a regular basis so that then I can actually move forward and say to themselves, hey, this is actually not really founded in anything.
I like all your ideas. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about is I bet you many managers see this to some degree in the people that they are managing. And it's not an easy conversation to have, right? Because you can see that they're feeling a lack of confidence. But I like some of your tips because managers who are not trained in all delving deep into people's psychology, but they can still ask that same question. I notice a little bit of hesitation. What's the fear over here? How can I help
Yeah.
you figure this thing out? What I like to tell people is what I call I am and I have statements. I actually get this from a coach that I do a lot of programs with, and that is in present tense. What is it that you have experienced? So, I am the person who assists in such and such a thing, and for me, it's helping people achieve the kind of transformation that they're looking for. And when you repeat those messages to yourself, because everything is a story, it's just which
Mhm.
story is getting airtime in your brain the most. So as you start repeating these other messages that are far more positive and understanding, I am the person who's learning and getting better every single day, every project, every engagement, I'm getting better and better at it, right? Nobody's expecting perfection from anybody because if that was the case, I don't even know, you'd be the CEO. I don't know what you would be at that point, right? So changing that story becomes really key over here.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. And like I said, we're kind of up on time right now, but I wanted to, thank everyone who watched and need any closing thoughts. I mean, I think that's a great way to close. But if you have anything else you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, no, this is such a prevalent topic that nobody talks about, or nobody's certainly not men, as you were saying, that feel like they can be vulnerable about it. I'm really glad to hear those law students who spoke up about it. So it's very prevalent. I think this is a great subject, and if anybody has something to share about it, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, agreed. If you guys have thoughts or feelings, or if you have experience with imposter syndrome, like I said, with yourself or with others, please feel free to hit the comment section below and let us know what you thought about the video, what you've experienced for yourself. How do you deal with it if you're dealing with it right now? And how do you help others deal with it if you do? But thanks again for tuning in, guys. Today was relatively. We try to keep it to 30 minutes these days, but yeah, I think it's an important concept, like Naheed said, to talk about. And I think opening that discussion, allowing people to have that freedom, that space to talk about it, whether you're man, woman, or other, right? I mean, I think it's a matter of where you need to be able to talk about these kind of things, and it's not something that fear of judgment should be holding you back about, right? I mean, if someone judges you, that's on them, not on you. That's more on them. So that's their own stories that are holding them back from being compassionate. So if you guys like the video, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, share with anyone who you think it might be relevant to, and tune in again in 2 weeks. We'll be here, same bad time, same bad channel, talking about. I hope you got that reference. Uh, but we were talking about more stuff again, more coaching concepts and things like that. So if you have any ideas for concepts you guys want to talk about, please let us know again. Feel free to reach out about that as well.
Yeah, this is really your show, so please reach out with ideas.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys. Thanks, Naheed.